2 rooms away from here, so you will be able to experience it bodily. And now I will explain you a bit about the political research behind it. I'm a trained architect, and ever since the beginning of my studies, I have been working in socially engaged projects with a group of architect students. And this topic, Intermundia, which is focusing on the outpost, one of the very first stops to Europe, entry point to Europe, the gated Europe, is not the first work that I did with migration. Actually, it goes way back in Croatia in the mid of 2000s, when we as a group of students wanted to work within the single detention center for illegal migrants, but at that moment it was just made impossible for us because they just needed a tender, they just needed construction workers to build higher fences and to build concrete prison yards. So Intermundia was exhibited at Monte Italia. It was a curated exhibition by Ippolito Castellini-Laparelli and Rem Koolhaas, and it tried to depict a portrait of Italy as an example of Western society. So the topics of migration, even though it was not in the very first layers of media in 2014. Of course, it was in the south of Europe, but not as after the summer of migrations, with the great influx coming from the Middle East and further via Greece. That is just the period when this research project started. In the beginning, I would like to show this map that is actually part of the Intermundia publication, and in the foreword written by Leopold Lambert. It's an art piece of Sabine Retoret, just to have this feeling of and sensation of awe looking at the Mediterranean Sea with this small tilt by 90 degrees, turning it into a peaceful pond where the cities, political borders between states are erased, and cities and territories seem so much closer. Basically, Intermundia tried to question the changing, always shifting borderscapes of trans-European and intra-European migration, but it was focusing on Lampedusa, like I said in the beginning. But instead of observing it as some sort of a jailed zone in the middle of conflict, I tried to find some sort of a polyperspective approach to the topic and the state of in-between, as it was a very short period of research before actually exhibiting. And in the beginning, when I started the project, I thought that I would be concentrating more on the, let's say, dry architecture and typologies of camps, especially going through this trajectory from Europe to the African soil and going back into history, researching the camps during the Second World War in Italy, where actually a lot of inhabitants from the Dalmatian coast, Dalmatia is part of Croatia, along with my family, went through this journey, Europeans fleeing from Europeans to Africa and staying on the peninsula of Sinai and in the Egyptian deserts. But along with the research, it sort of drifted away, and with the visit to the island of Lampedusa and the impossibilities of working within these sorts of detention camps that are very hidden in the island, it turned to be a more ethnographic, let's say, research on the local community and the way how they responded to the migrations. I will just go through the presentation in chapters. I was very lucky because I had support of so many people during this research phase and the project, and just a group of Croatian journalists finished a quite amazing documentary on Lampedusa, called Hotel Europa. It was 2013, by the end of the year, when there was a great a ship drowned just a couple of kilometers away from the city of Lampedusa. So I was lucky using their contacts with the locals, even with the mayors, and getting some very important material. This image is showing the Mediterranean and actually showing the course, which is the direction followed from Libya to reach Lampedusa, is the course 0.05. In the research, I'm showing these two images. On your right, it's the image of the Mediterranean Big Bang, which was actually a product of a conceptual architectural competition that I was running with colleagues from the Zagreb Society of Architects. It was a competition on geopolitical borders, and this image struck me to think about a Pangaea, to think about a united, let's say, continent, and the Mediterranean is not, let's say, a natural obstacle of entering Europe. Other projects from the beginning of the 20th century, the engineering projects of actually using land of the Mediterranean Sea. This Atlantropa project that was devised by German architect Hermann Zerger. It was actually a project of the Übermensch, let's say, like one of the very beginning of the Nazis' projects of colonizing yet again the African soil and making territories for the white man. Here are some of the infrared images made by cameras from Frontex. I think everyone now knows what kind of an agency is Frontex, specialized in externalizing European borders further and further from the actual borders of the European Union. And I gained this material, of course, off the record, but they're not showing any compromising material, because in the entire research I was never showing bodies and injured bodies, dead bodies, but here just to have a view to a general public in which way the ships have been intercepted or found being sunk. And now, as there are no dots like fireflies, dots in the sea, you see that there are no people that were injured in these accidents, or that everybody already has left the boat. And this black and white strip of images is actually showing the boat with a single captain driving the operation. The images of the abandoned dinghy boats with very few belongings, etc. In that very short period of research, of course, I was being in contact with a lot of international groups and also activist groups working on migration, especially migration from sub-Saharan Africa to Europe for more than decades. And these parts of official reports have been also displayed at the Venice Bienale. So the moment when I reached Lampedusa was the moment when the entire island was, let's say, abandoned by the migrant community. The single detention center that was hidden in the island was in reconstruction, let's say. So all the people arriving to the island have been shifted to the mainland, Italy or Sicily. This is just another image from that documentary that I mentioned earlier, Hotel Lampedusa. And I found this map quite important at the moment. Now, of course, it's outdated, but still it is showing 393 closed camps detaining migrants in Europe in 2012, and nowadays the numbers are even higher. They're now shown here in different categories, but even if we erase European borders, political or natural borders of the continent, just by the dotted zones of the camps, we can recreate in our minds the borders and the political borders. It was also important to address European migration policies ever since from the 1948 Declaration of Human Rights to the Dublin agreements in 2008 and further on, were actually, especially in the case of the European states being on the south, on the periphery of Europe, being the ones responsible in receiving migrants, as people in a way needed to stay in the country of their very first arrival, where they have been registered. Lampedusa is really a tiny island that geographically actually belongs to Africa, not to Europe. In length, it's maybe only 6 kilometers, with a population of 10,000 inhabitants. So imagine in 2013, when there was 10,000 newcomers, that it was really a state of emergency. But nevertheless, Lampedusa, especially within Italy, ever since the 70s, was one of the most famous tourist destinations, especially for this sort of Robinson wild tourism. And even in 2011, the very famous Rabbit Beach, which is a site of coming people from migrants from Africa, it was named one of the most beautiful beaches, like a beach in Seychelles to go to. In history, during the 20th century and during the World Wars, of course, it was a very important geostrategic position. But in history, looking from the position of me coming from Croatia, what is also interesting that fishermen from the islands in Croatia would actually go all the way to Lampedusa to fish for sardines, and even nowadays there are like bistros and bars on the island of Hvar named after Lampedusa. On your left, this is like the main street in Lampedusa, via Roma, and for somebody coming from the Mediterranean, it is a very different feeling of the Mediterranean and the Mediterranean culture, and let's say especially architecture, this proto-rationalist architecture with flat roofs, completely different of the let's say also Italian and Croatian heritage on the Eastern Adriatic. During the stay on the island, there were two locations that were important. So just besides the reception and detention center, it was the cemetery of the boats on Lampedusa, very near to the new old port of the city. And actually on this side, the field recordings, the sound was recorded that is used in the installation. Here, the dominant color is this beautiful blue, which is a Tunisian color, at least what they told on Lampedusa. And these are just some images of the closed down camp and construction sites. And the next one will show the interior of the rooms and facilities within that camp. I have already before been inside these sorts of high security camps and prison-like situations, and I was always, I don't know, it's not a good word to say fascinated, but with this human urge to leave a trace, to sign something, to mark that you have visited, been in that place. So these are ortho images of Lampedusa. Like I told you, it's like 6 kilometers wide, maybe 22 square kilometers in surface area of the island. The index 1 and 2 is pointing on the locations of the detention center that is very much hidden in the island, and point 2 is pointing to the Cimitero delle Barche. The city is a modernistically planned city, as you can see on the other side, and as mentioned before, the research went into probing, let's say, the feelings of Lampedusans about the states of emergency. At that point, I was not speaking Italian, but I was very well prepared to conduct some interviews. And it was back then, I don't know if it was, how to say, even auto-suggested by my very own worldviews, but in a way it was a feeling of reception and solidarity with migrants coming from Africa, and being in such a position where the island of Lampedusa is, questions of migration are eternal, not something happening in the crisis. And this is Gaspare, a Lampedusan citizen that I met in front of the mayor's office, who responded first on the question, is he feeling like an Italian or a European citizen? He's saying, io sono africano, I am the African. This is a photo just of the very famous Giusy Nicolini, politician and mayor of Lampedusa. She's out of post since a couple of years, but she's been in world media like let's say a poster politician for the cause of open borders of Europe. And it's interesting how she also responded to this question of nationality or belonging to European citizenry, that Lampedusans are citizens of the world, cosmopolitan, and that they are feeling this sort of denied citizenship in neglection from the rest of the Europe. Of course, there were talks with some activists running alternative centers, political and cultural centers with no program, as they say, being very strong in their ideas, collecting the residuals on the beach with not having a very clear idea what will they be doing with these items, etc. And of course having a problem with certain parts of the inhabitants of Lampedusa. Lampedusa actually, especially nowadays, votes more Lega Nord or extreme right parties in Italy. This is a work by a young photographer, and this photo is taken actually in the vicinity of the city of Zagreb, the capital of Croatia. Ana Mihalic was doing a portrait series of this very famous, actually, immigrant in Croatia, Prince Vail Samiki, during his leisure time. And this image was like a single real portrait image, or an image showing a person, which was interesting to me and wanted to show this ambivalence of is the person enjoying the swim? It could be a sea, it could be a river, or is the person in some sort of a jeopardy? Of course, the entire question of illegal migrations I try to put in relation with the economic migrations, and that they are parallel, that the detaining of the illegal migrants are parallel to the wanderings of the modern circulants, the light infantry of global capitalism, as Guy Standing is calling this new class. And this condition of a half-citizen, a migrant, the Nisen, has to propose some sort of a new historical consciousness, that this figure, this marginal figure, is actually not at the periphery, but deserves to be the central figure of our times, to question all the topics of in which society we want to live. And these are the thoughts even from Hannah Arendt or John Berger, or even now Boris Budin, like thinking about migrants as the key figures. Also, if we look in certain societies and states, the questions how we are dealing with minorities and migrants are actually like the barometers of what is the sanity and the soundness of a certain society. So with this saying Io sono africano, it was interesting to me to compare it with the boast of Roman citizens like 2,000 years ago, which was like an Italian and other people from the colonies with the political rights being proud of being Roman citizens. And nowadays, that was back in 2014, an Italian citizen being proud of calling himself an African. So these are just a couple of images how it was displayed in Corderie, in Arsenal, in Venice, because it was the exhibition was comprised of at least 40 projects, and each project had a slot of meter and a half, let's say. So actually, those were the limits of the project and how it was done, and then conceived to work in a collective show. Yes, I hope afterwards at some point you will have time to experience the light and sound installation. On it I worked with a sound artist from Croatia, Bojan Gagic, and also an engineer, Miodrag Ladovic, who each time travels. It's a very heavy installation and quite complex, even though it looks so simple from the outside. It weighs 1.5 tons, so I'm very grateful that Umetnostna Galerija actually wanted to reinstall this piece. These are just the interiors, because when you enter the installation, it was supposed to bring some sort of an uneasy feeling, let's say, of the erosion of social rights of every one of us, that there is no borders of who is safe and who is not safe. So you're actually entering a very dark room and listening to the sounds that are trying to play with your sensation of your very own body and stability, etc. And in the end, you are getting, let's say, a decapitated self-portrait with this citation of Gaspare, who is not a fictional character, nor a very young, let's say, political activist, but let's say an ordinary citizen of Lampedusa saying, Io sono africano. I also, I mean, in my practice, actually, how I kind of ended up in the art world, let's say, I'm doing a lot of exhibition design, and I have been curating, especially after the Venice Biennale, working with artists closely on the topics of urban resilience, urban belonging, and similar. And I just wanted to briefly show you, and I have a copy here, so maybe during the coffee break you could have a better look inside the publication. I have guest edited a scientific journal on visual arts on the topic of transmigrancy, on psychogeographies of the threshold, and within the magazine I tried to put together two topics that actually kind of started to interest me even with Intermundia, and it's like the contemporary so-called refugee crisis, to put in relation with the historic phenomenon of economic migrations, Gastarbeiterism as we call it. And actually on the cover, again, spectacularization, let's say, it's an image that my artistic partner, he's a video maker, Matija Kralj, made during one of our visits on Lesbos. I guess everyone recognizes this dump of life vests because it's been shown quite a lot and used even in the works of Ai Weiwei and many other artists. It was important for us to show it, how it actually looks. So it's just basically a dump yard. There are some ships now outside of the frame of the image that are actually even now losing this very strong neon cover of the. Actually, most of them are fake life vests that are produced in Turkey and then sold to migrants crossing to the island of Lesbos. But to go back to the contents of the magazine, so it's split in two chapters: the cities of refugees, which are more. Topics are more architectural, let's say, and territorial, dealing with the notions of city as a camp and camp as a city, looking in which ways modern cities, contemporary cities, are becoming more securitized under mechanisms of control, and actually how camps are gaining this sort of urbanity and new commons. Other topics that are addressing this idea of being everywhere, these new transnational cultures emerging from people on the move. And this part is ending with quite an important interview with Andrew Hirscher, who looked back through the, let's say, history of architecture in the 20th century and how the topics of migration, let's say refugee, and architecture have never been put to surface. Even if we think about famous modernist works of Le Corbusier, the Domino House, it was done actually to reduce the housing shortage after the Second World War. And the other part is more focusing on artistic practices, dealing with the topics of guest workers. So here are some short examples, projects done also in Slovenia, ending up with the story of John Burgess, a seventh man book. This is just one of the images of a camp near Idomeni, Greece, that I have been working also as an architect, building some sort of a school shelter. And here I'm just showing briefly to say that with the colleague Matija Kralj, we've been doing experimental videos because we have been filming ever since 2015 up till now the construction of the Balkan route, and we've been to places from Slovenia, the Dobova transit and detention centers, all the way to the Syrian border. So thank you.